Welcome and thank you for watching this training video for MTBC employees. In this segment, you will learn about the healthcare provider's office and the essential elements required to run a healthcare practice. To begin, let's start with how patients go to their provider. After scheduling an appointment, most patients will drive or be driven to their provider's office. In America, you must get a driver's license to operate any motor vehicle. This requires both a written and practical exam, and you must be at least 17 years old to begin studying and practicing for this exam. There are expensive fines associated with driving a motor vehicle without a license or not following the laws regulating driving safely. To locate their provider's office, patients may use Global Positioning Services or GPS. This feature is available on all smartphones and in standalone units or in a car's dashboard. The GPS will guide the patient to the location with turn-by-turn directions, even projecting arrival time based on distance and traffic. The reason as to why this is so accurate is because every road built in America is properly identified with an address and submitted to the government for record keeping. Using this data, patients can go to any location for his office or hospital visit. An important fact about commercial buildings in America is that they have signboards to guide their customer base. For healthcare offices, this information can include the address or number of the building, the name and specialty of the provider, and finally a phone number for this practice. This signboard serves multiple purposes. 1. To advertise for potential clients. 2. To locate the business. And 3. To provide contact details for patients. After arriving to the practice, you will have the option to park your vehicle in the parking lot and walk to the practice. A key thing to note here is that every business needs to follow regulations to assist handicapped individuals. In this example, the closest parking spot is left open for the handicapped client. Handicapped parking is distinguished from regular parking with the universally known blue logo. Patients can obtain handicapped parking permits by having their provider fill out the necessary paperwork and file with the same authority that provides the driver's license. If anyone illegally parks without a proper permit in a handicapped parking spot, he or she will be charged a hefty fine and may have their vehicle towed. Before we step into the practice, let's talk about a few important features outside the office. In this example, there is a back entrance reserved for only employees and other service providers of the practice. Every practice must maintain at least one laboratory box to send out patient samples to specific labs. An employee from the lab will come every evening and pick up lab samples for the practice. Each lab sample is properly labeled and stored in this locked box, so only a laboratory employee can pick up the sample. It is illegal to tamper with the patient's samples if you are not an employee of the lab or the practice. Every provider will also have a trash can so that he can remove trash regularly as their township schedule. Now, let's move to the entrance of the practice. Similarly to the handicapped parking space, every practice is required to have easier accessibility for handicapped individuals. This practice provides a ramp with a guardrail so that it is wheelchair accessible and any handicapped individual can use it. In addition to the ramp, the practice also provides stairs for any patients to use. Once you walk through the door, you will enter the waiting room for the practice. This room allows patients to check in and also pick up any personal information from the practice. Prior to going over all the essential items of the waiting room, let's quickly go over some safety guidelines present in every office. Every business that serves the public must be prepared in case of an emergency. For example, this practice maintains a fire extinguisher and emergency lights near the exit of the practice. The fire extinguisher must be checked yearly to ensure that it is properly functioning, and has a tag that will log every maintenance check. In addition, the emergency light will only turn on to guide patients to the exit in case of an emergency. Every waiting room will have chairs for the patients to sit on while they wait for the provider, and also a location to store their coats. The practice might also have different types of entertainment for the patients while they wait. This might include magazines ranging in different topics, and a TV with entertaining programming. Another feature of the waiting room is marketing materials relating to the pharmaceutical drugs or even MTBC products such as the PHR or Patient Health Record Portal. With this information, patients will become more informed about their health and new medications. Also in the waiting area, many patients use our check-in kiosk or iCheck-in app. This app lets patients check in and will be talked about in detail in the next segment. Another feature common to all practices is a bathroom that can be used by patients. Many providers will also have a bathroom that is wheelchair accessible, which means that the room is wider and has guardrails for the patients to use. There is also a laboratory slot for patients to leave samples. This laboratory slot is usually available for practices that require patients' urine samples. Patients can prepare their sample and properly label them for the nurse to pick up through this slot. Now that we covered the basics of a patient's waiting room, let's go into another room that is equally important. This is the front office receptionist area. This is where the front office staff will take in a patient, check out patients, and also collect patients' demographics and insurance information. Typically, the front office staff has access to a computer to see MTBC's system and also will be close to a fax machine, the printer, and a scanner to scan insurances and other materials. It is also important for the front desk to be organized. Most receptionists will have a tool to organize their paperwork. In this example, you can see that the front office staff has a paper organizer. This lets them organize the paper going inbound and outbound and pages that need to be scanned into MTBC's system. Another important area with a small practice is the nurse's station or their lab center. The nurse must also have access to a computer, scanner, and other daily office tools such as a label creator for their labs and biomedical devices for testing. Furthermore, you will see a nurse's station where the nurse can prepare samples and label them appropriately prior to sending them to the lab. The next room that is important is a patient's examination room. In this example, the provider has 2 examination rooms. Typically, there will be multiple examination rooms in every office. The examination room will have additional medical supplies such as a blood pressure cuff, ear examination tools, and also height and weight scales. In addition, depending on the practice, there also might be another computer to access our system. There will also be some health guideline materials available around the office, as well as a patient's chair for the patient to sit on. This chair is typically higher and longer in case the patient needs to lie down during the visit. The final room that is important for the practice is the provider's room. This room usually is separate from the rest of the rooms and showcases the provider's qualification in medical school. It also has an area where the provider can look up references to their medical knowledges with books and other reference material. Finally, the provider will have access to his computers and any other pertinent materials like Dragon dictation if he or she would like to dictate a note. To make the room feel more personal, you will see an area with family picture and other personal items. Finally, every provider's room will have an area to store their medical quote and other medical supplies. In some offices, the provider has a recreational area for employees to socialize or eat lunch. In this example, you will see 2 fridges. One is a lab fridge which stores samples for immunization shots, and the second is a personal fridge which is for employees to store their lunch meals. The lab fridge will also have other materials that need to be properly logged and kept securely for patients. Now that we covered the basics of a provider's office, next we will talk about the patient's workflow as they go through their visit. Patients that use providers on MTBC's system can schedule appointments in 2 ways. 1, to call and schedule your appointment with your provider, and 2, to use your PHR account. Once a patient calls, the front office staff will pick up the phone and schedule an appointment with a few simple questions. On the phone, patient typically gives their first and last name, date of birth, and contact information. Using this limited information, our system allows providers to automate balance and appointment reminder calls as well as SMS reminders. We also enable their patient portal with the patient's email address so they can manage their health information. This is why getting these initial questions answered is very important for the provider using MTBC's system. There are 2 types of patients that will walk into a provider's office: new patients and existing patients. For new patients, they will typically walk to the front desk and tell the receptionist that they are a new patient and would like to see the provider. Then the receptionist will proceed and give them a stack of paperwork to review and sign.
You can fill that out for me and just give it back when you're done.
This initial paperwork includes a HIPAA agreement for the doctor and her employees to view the particular patient's health information, a consent form for the doctor to see the patient, and an insurance and demographic form so the front office can identify and locate the patient. After filling out all these forms, the patient will also provide an insurance card so the front office staff can scan it into our system. Finally, the new patient will be asked to pay her copay for the visit and also wait for the provider in the waiting room. For an existing patient, they may use either our kiosk or iCheck-in application to check in for their appointment, or they can also talk to the receptionist to check them in. The front office staff will usually verify their demographic and insurance information and also collect the copay for the visit. This is also done with the kiosk and iCheck-in app. Once they are done with these tasks, the patient will wait in the waiting room to see the provider. Once the patient is called, he or she will be taken into the exam room by the nurse. Prior to going into the room, the nurse will designate the room as occupied with a marker. In this instance, we'll be using the room marker at the top of the door. The nurse will then proceed to conduct basic initial tasks such as recording vital signs, history of presenting illness, and taking basic health information such as blood pressure, height, and weight. The nurse might also ask questions regarding the patient's health information prior to the doctor's arrival. Once the nurse completes her task, she'll go out of the room and notify the provider that the patient is waiting in the room. When the provider goes inside, he or she will change the marker, which lets everyone in the office know that the provider is in that room. Then the provider will proceed procedures to fully complete the chart note for the patient. The provider will either write down or electronically chart the prognosis and diagnosis for the patient. In our system, we even have a method for the provider to take notes for the front desk to view after the appointment. Sometimes, after the doctor's examination, the provider may request the patient to take some tests. These tests are typically conducted by the nurse. For example, the nurse will tell the patient to use the bathroom in the waiting room and prepare a urine sample for the lab. Once the patient is done with the sample, he or she will place this within an opening in the bathroom for the nurse to pick up. The nurse will pick up the sample and prepare it at her lab station. After the patient is done with all the tasks required of them, the nurse will usually tell the patient to go out to the front desk to check out. The checkout process usually requires the patient to pick up items such as medical prescriptions and other important notes for the patient prior to leaving the office. Once the front office staff prepares these items and provides it to the patient will leave the office and go about the rest of the day. Once the patient is out of the office, the provider and nurse have to follow up with certain tasks for their daily workflow. For the provider, this includes finishing the full note for the patient by going back into her office and entering the note either with an outside dictation software such as Dragon Dictation or manually entering it within the Web EHR. This is also the location where the providers will get additional paperwork for referrals and other essential items for her patients. The nurse, on the other hand, will have to prepare the sample and put it outside for the lab to pick up. Typically, the labs will pick up the samples at the end of each day so the patients can have their samples quickly analyzed. At the end of the day, the practice will send over their billing. There are two different ways that the practice can send us their billing. One is to use our electronic system to create claims, and two is to send over paper superbills with our secure software. To send an electronic superbill, all you need is an internet-connected computer, and you can send e-claims from our system. Even when you send e-claims, the practice will still need to send eligibility of benefits or EOBs via our secure method. When sending paper superbills, we recommend the practice to send us the day sheet with notes, the patient's demographics, the patient's superbills, and the patient's medical charts. In addition, we will also need the EOBs as mentioned before. Each practice is unique and can send over different items depending on how they use our system. As an employee of MTBC, you will also be required to communicate with the client using our secure support messages. This will require the office manager to be trained to quickly communicate to their billing team. Aside from secure support communication, the practice will also need to complete the pending transaction list to fully address all the concerns with their billing. MTBC is fully committed to providing the best billing service to their providers, but this can only be achieved with the cooperation of our clients to constantly communicate to their billing team.